Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about the future. Where is humanity going? Where do we want it to go? What are the pitfalls we have to avoid in order to get there? And what can we do to influence the future in a positive way? I'll be speaking with two futurists. A bit later in the show, we'll have a pre-taped interview with Professor David Passig, a futurist from Bar-Ilan University in Israel. But now, I'd like to introduce another futurist, John Smart. John is director of the Acceleration Studies Foundation, which is a foresight research organization in Mountain View, California. He's co-founder of the Devo Universe Research Community, which is an international community of scholars exploring evolutionary and developmental change, and he's also director of the Emerging Technology Master's Degree Program at the University of Advancing Technology in Phoenix, Arizona. He has a master's degree in future studies from the University of Houston and is a frequent blogger on futurist issues. John, you're not only a futurist, but you also help to train other futurists. What can you tell me about that?
Well, Marty, it's a fascinating field. It's only been around since the 1970s. The first program was started at Houston, where I got my master's degree. And there's about 18 of them in the world now. Most are masters, but about 4 or 5 of them are PhDs as well. And like I said, it's a fascinating, very small field that helps you look more than 3 years out into the future. Now,
what kind of disciplines do you have to master to be a futurist?
Well, if you're looking less than 3 years out, you can do strategic planning like we've seen in the business community. But if you're looking further than that, you have to do things like horizon scanning, where you're looking at new things that could become issues that are not issues today. You have to create what are called scenarios, which are possible futures, and then imagine if your strategy is to see if you can create strategy that is going to be robust to those.
Is the goal to decide upon a desirable future and then try to figure out how to get there? Or do you try to figure out where we're going, whether we want to get there or not?
Well, a famous futurist named Roy Amara said there are possible, probable, and preferable futures. So the possible are the ones that we could create. The artists, like science fiction authors, are masters at those. The probable are the ones the scientists are discovering for us, and the social scientists, the direction that society and technology seems to be going in the universe. And the preferable are the ones you just mentioned, the ones that we create agendas for and try to make happen because we prefer them, our values guide us in those directions.
Now, your work has a lot to do with accelerating technologies, the idea that technology is accelerating at a constantly increasing rate. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the book Future Shock in 1970, which I'm sure you remember, yes, is probably the first book that made it obvious to us in the Western world, in the modern Western world, that technology was going faster and faster every year. It was one of the most popular books when it came out in 1970. It still sells very well today. And the first 3 chapters are all about this accelerating change and the shock that it brings to us trying to adapt to it. Our organization was started in 2003 to try and study these issues because there wasn't any nonprofit out there studying accelerating change.
Is rapidly accelerating change a desirable goal? Do we want it to accelerate faster and faster? Usually when things keep accelerating faster and faster, they crack up at some point.
Yes, although there's a small subset of things that don't seem to do that. Nanotechnologies, computing technologies, and communication technologies are really the big 3 that always accelerate no matter what humans do. Whether we want them to or not, it seems to be just our interaction with technology makes those 3 go faster every year. And when they do so, they use less resources, less matter, less space, less energy and time to create the next generation, so they don't run into resource limits like all the other things in the human world.
So if our technology keeps on developing at the pace that it's going, or even at a faster rate, what do you think that's going to make the world look like in, say, 20 years from now?
Well, probably many of the social and economic and political environments that we have today will look very much the same. Humans don't adapt to rapid change. We like to slow down and simplify as our technology speeds up and complexifies all around us. But the technology itself, however, I think will be very different. And I think we'll reach a point where our technologies capture and surpass all of the highest human attributes that we have. And that'll be a very interesting world where our technologies become, if you will, aspects of our higher humanity. So then we can talk of ourselves as a biological self and as an electronic self. And what's going to happen in the electronic space is going to be very different from what's going to happen in the space that we're currently living in.
Does that mean that machines might be smarter than people?
I think that today many machines are already quite a bit smarter than people in very narrow areas. My calculating watch is smarter than me at calculating and at timekeeping. But those are very narrow areas of intelligence. Chess playing, we've seen the Watson computer beat the best Jeopardy champions just last year. Bit by bit by bit, machines are picking up narrow areas of intelligence and reaching what's called a singularity, which means a point of human surpassing machine intelligence.
Now there's a concept called spiritual machines. In fact, you have a book in front of you written by Ray Kurzweil, who's a very well-known futurist. Maybe you could hold up the book, in fact. The age of spiritual machines, does that imply that the machines will have a soul and they'll have their own desires and their own will? If you want to straighten up the book, you can see. Yeah, camera 3. Okay, I think we got it.
Well, those are pretty interesting speculations, aren't they? To what extent, as the machines develop our higher features, do they have our emotions? Do they have values? Do they have consciousness? And do they have a spiritual soul or self? There are many scientists today that would argue that everything about human beings that makes us human is physical, and we are in the process of adding those processes to machines to create what are called biologically inspired computers, computers that have all of our same physical processes. So if you and I are spiritual machines, very complex physical patterns, as we learn to put those patterns into technology, they will develop those same things as well. And as Kurzweil likes to say, there will come a point where the machines may wake up and very likely they won't understand everything about the universe. So they'll have a spiritual relationship to the universe just like you and I do.
We're going to continue this conversation shortly, but before we do, we have a video taped previously with David Passig. David Passig is a futurist who specializes in technological, social, and educational futures, as well as the future of conflict. He's an associate professor at Bar-Ilan University in Israel, where he heads the graduate program in information and communication technology, as well as the virtual reality lab. He's written 2 books that were bestsellers in Israel. They are The Future Code and 2048. He's a frequent lecturer and consultant and has a PhD in anticipatory anthropology from the University of Minnesota. Let's go ahead and roll that tape. David, when you say you're a futurist, does that mean that you're trying to predict the future?
We're trying to study the future, which is very different than predicting the future. Studying the future means that we are trying to figure out the trends, not in order to know what's going to happen in the future, but in order to better understand what is the right thing to do at the present. And these are very different perspectives.
Well, what are the main driving forces? What are the things you see as having the greatest influence on the future?
Well, there are a few that are crucial for humanity in the 21st century. One of them, of course, is energy. Energy is the blood of civilization. And we are running into deep troubles into the 21st century in terms of new resources and new amounts of resources to be able to provide 10 billion people with energy they are really consuming in a way that we couldn't even imagine a few decades ago.
Is it that we don't have enough energy, or it's too expensive to extract it, or there are too many political problems, the people we want to buy it from don't like us? What's the issue here?
You summarized everything. But one of the main issues is that in order to provide for 10 billion people, and by 2050, the amount of energy that you and me are consuming, the same level of consumption, we need to extract huge amounts and provide to so many people that don't have at this moment that energy. And it doesn't seem that we have enough. It doesn't seem that we have enough political will, etc., etc.
Well, if we get to a crisis point where our whole industrial setup is liable to collapse unless we get new energy, wouldn't that provide the political will?
Well, most of the time the political will comes with or because of conflicts, world conflicts. And then societies are really willing to take a lot of deficits to do things that it was imaginable just a few years ago. So that's why I'm very interested into the conflicts of the 21st century, because when you understand those conflicts, you understand what type of technologies might develop, you understand what types of changes these societies will be doing because of that stress of conflicts.
Now, when we talk about the future of society, is that even a valid question? That assumes that society is one thing. If we ask, is the future going to be good for society? Well, maybe it will be good for some societies and not so good for other societies. Can we differentiate which societies are likely to be the future winners and which are likely to be the future losers?
Yes, well, again, if you analyze with a very reliable methodology, and this is the most important thing that we futurists bring to the table, we are not thinkers. We are not analysts. We are developing methodologies with which we try to understand the logic, how systems are evolving. And with that logic, we are trying to figure out the next stage of a system. Now, as far as I understand, again, with some methodologies I'm using, it is clear that the 21st century still belongs to the US, to the Western cultures. Now, some people are saying it's not. Some people are saying it belongs to the East again. I'm not part of those people. A lot of the factors that brought Western cultures to be so successful are still playing out, and the 21st century is going to show that Western cultures, with their technologies, with their values, are going still to dominate human history.
What about population growth? The human population appears to be growing at an exponential rate. That obviously is not sustainable over the long term. What do you think is going to happen?
You see, this is another issue which is a very good example to show how futurists are thinking and other people are thinking. Many people lately have learned that humanity have reached 7 billion people. And most of the public venues and publications were concentrating on the next 40 years by 2050 and speaking about between 9 to 10 billion people. And they did not teach the people that time does not stop at 2050. There is still another 50 years, or at least another century, that we can estimate at this point how many people will be there. So at this point of time, people think, wow, this growth is going to continue, and we're going to see tremendous impact of that growth. But as far as we understand at this point of time in history, by 2050, humanity is going to start shrinking. And by the end of the 21st century, if by 2050 will be about 10 billion people, by the end of the 21st century will be around 5 to 6 billion people again.
Is that because the birth rate will decline, or natural disasters and wars and infectious disease will kill lots of people?
It's because there are 10 reasons. The main reasons are human-based reasons, which is mostly there are at this point of time already in human populations, we have for every 100 females, there are about 117 males.
Is that true worldwide?
Worldwide. This is the worldwide picture. There are different nations with different figures. For example, China, they have 20% more males than females. This is for just one example. Another example is that, of course, fertility rate. The fertility rate all over the world is dropping so fast. You know, we were used in the 20th century that a lot of nations used to have 4, 5, 6, 7 kids for each female. Nowadays, most of the nations are barely doing the replacement rate, which is 2.1 kids for each female.
Is there any understanding of why fertility rates would drop? Is it because women don't want children, or there's something happening which they don't understand, which just makes it harder for them to get pregnant or bear children?
We are aware of some reasons. I don't think we really understand the whole picture. The first and most important thing, of course, is the education of females, which brings them to have only a few kids.
Now, as a futurist, do you recommend that we do any specific things to try to produce a better future?
Of course, that's exactly the point of futurist thinking. We are trying to figure out what's best to do at the present, you know. And one of the most important thing is what we call help the poor get out from that state of mind. It's not just a state of economy, it's a state of mind. And the effect of helping the poor is tremendously so beneficial to societies. Now, people think, you know, just give them some technologies. That's not enough. It's a state of mind that needs to be taken care of.
Well, right now we see very often people who claim to represent the poor tell them that they're victims and all their problems are somebody else's fault. So I gather that that's not the approach that you're taking. You're talking about teaching people to be self-reliant, that their destiny is in their hands primarily?
Exactly. And that's what makes really a great impact on so many other things, that they are resolved almost immediately, if only that mindset is changing.
Do you think there's a possible future in which all of mankind is basically united, or there'll always be opposing camps in different groups that are hostile?
Well, I believe there will be some time, but it's millennials ahead. It's not something in the next century or a couple centuries.
Well, based on your studies and considering that technology has gotten to the point where means of mass destruction are in the hands of many people, are you basically optimistic about the future of humanity, or are you pessimistic?
I'm very optimistic. I believe that we'll do a lot of mistakes, as we did forever, okay? But those mistakes are not mistakes that are going to erase humanity from Earth. Those mistakes might bring a lot of difficulties, a lot of hardships and hard times. But overall speaking, humanity has a driving force to bring it in its intelligence to be effective, to balance a lot of powers and a lot of drives, from primitive drives to very sophisticated drives. And overall, humanity is just at its very beginning journey in time.
That was Professor David Passig of Bar-Ilan University in Israel. Now, Professor Passig said that he believes the human race is just at the beginning of its journey. Do you agree with him? Because some people think the human race might be nearing the end of its journey.
That's an interesting question. If you talk about the higher features of human beings, our intelligence, our complexity, our humanity, I absolutely think we're at the very beginning still, and there's so much ahead. I share his optimism. Will biological human beings be at the top of the pyramid in even 50 years from now? I don't think so. I think we're very close now to a transition to a far, far faster world with much deeper machine intelligence all around us. And these tools we use today, these cell phones and laptops, they're really digital extensions of ourselves, and we're going to see them grow in sophistication and ability in amazing ways just in the next 10 years.
Now, some people say that the defining feature of the future society will not be so much the technology, but the values and beliefs of that society. What do you think are the suitable values and beliefs for the future society?
Well, I think this gets back to your theory of change. It's a fantastic question, Marty. My theory of change is that all complex systems are engaging in both evolutionary processes, as Dr. Passig was talking about, but also developmental processes. And so we have evolutionary and developmental values around these processes.
This is Evo-Devo, something you call Evo-Devo. You're involved with this group that promotes that.
Yes. So if you remember Darwin's tree of life, that's an evolutionary process. Something starts with a single cell, for example, and evolutionary processes are constantly branching. They're constantly creating variety, specialization, and diversity. And so there's tree processes all through biology, technology, society, where we see more diversity, more specialization, more variety. Developmental process is exactly the opposite. It's taking the chaos out of a system and hitting a future target. Think of two genetically identical twins. Everything about them that matters on the molecular scale is actually evolutionarily different. Their fingerprints are different. The way their brains are wired up is different. Those processes all happen in a selectionist, bottom-up evolutionary manner. And yet, those two twins hit targets that are the same on the system level. Look at them from across the room, they look the same. So when you talk about social development, economic development, technological development, universal development, you're talking about funnel processes. And I would say the values that we associate commonly with evolutionary processes are things like diversity, individuation, competition, traditional Western values. On the developmental side, we associate concepts like sustainability, universality, cooperation, pretty much opposite or bookends to the evolutionary values. Both of these seem to be fundamentally important to the future.
Do you think we'll ever be able to control the future and make it to our order, or do you think that the things we can't control will always be stronger than the things we can control?
Well, St. Francis of Assisi said, "Universe, grant me the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to understand the things I can't change, and the serenity, the serenity to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference." And I think that's pretty much how life works. There's certain things we can change, we steer towards, and there's certain things that are coming at us like tidal waves, and one of those is accelerating computational intelligence. That's something that I don't think we could really take out of the human future, barring complete elimination of or catastrophe of the species. And so those are the kinds of things that we pretty much guide rather than control.
Now, should we look at this with great anticipation, like this will be a wonderful thing when this technology advances? Or should we look at it with maybe a little bit of fear because maybe we'll become less significant and our lives won't be quite as important? Maybe the machines won't even need us anymore after a while.
Well, there's an assumption here, and the assumption is that as the machines get more complex, they stay separate from us. And I don't buy that assumption. I think the machines are going to be ever more intimately connected with us, as Ray says in his books. And you will talk about an electronic Marty, and I'll talk about an electronic John. And while I'm asleep and while you're busy, our electronic versions will be doing things for us. Even just 10 or 15 years from today, we'll have avatars that do these things. And we'll start to see ourselves as in both places. So I think our greatest challenge is gardening, if you will, our technologies so that they reflect our higher selves.
Now, one of the biggest problems in human life is the fact that human beings often don't get along with each other, and technology can be turned into a weapon just as easily it can be turned into a source of benefit. Is there any way of planning for the future that we can deal with that issue where some people just don't want to go with somebody else's program?
I think there are, and the book Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, which talks about why violence has declined in the West over the last several hundred years, is a fantastic and optimistic look at how violence reduces in severity the more complex and the more intelligent our simulations of the world become.
at some point do we have to wonder what makes existence fulfilling? So for example, I could have a robot that runs into the kitchen for me and brings me back a sandwich, but maybe I'd rather do that myself. I mean, is it the goal to save labor? Is the ultimate goal to expend as little effort as possible? I mean, and what is it that makes life fun and worth experiencing?
I would say, again, back to this Devo value set, things that we can predict, that we've done before, we try and put them into unconsciousness and not think about them. So we add them on as skills, like driving a car or operating a tennis racket. But then we're constantly also trying to grow our tree of life, trying to get into new areas that no one has gone to before in the arts, in the sciences, in business. And so I think that we're really trying to relax and challenge ourselves both at the same time.
Are there any particular pitfalls that we need to be aware of as we go into the future, these gotchas that maybe could trip us up?
Well, as the technologies get more complex, individuals can do more destructive things with them, even as the average amount of violence has gone down. So I think we have to look to our own biology and understand how it protects itself. We have immune systems that go everywhere in our body. Now, if you remember Minority Report, those little spider robots that were going through the buildings looking for Tom Cruise, I think that is a pretty accurate description of the kind of immune systems and technology we're going to have in 100 years, because individuals will have tremendous power for good or ill. So we'll have to have a very complex set of immune systems and federations of political systems creating those, so no one organization controlling them.
So do you think the human race as a whole might turn out to be somewhat analogous to a human individual? Every organ of the human body has an analog in society as a whole?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a direct analog, but I would say the global brain concept, or the global organism, the global superorganism concept, which has been around since the 1930s, is very accurate.
Okay. We could go on for quite a bit longer, but I've just gotten the signal that we're just about out of time, so we are going to have to wrap the show. I'd like to thank my guest, John Smart of the Acceleration Studies Foundation, also David Passig from Bar-Ilan University in Israel. That interview was taped earlier. Thank you for watching. Please visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman. We'll see you next time.